The Midnight Map in the Owl of Echo Valley. The package that arrived at twilight. It was the sort of twilight that made the world feel hushed, like even the wind had paused to listen. In the village of Fennelbrook, where every rooftop wore a crown of moss, and the lamplighters still walked the cobblestone streets each evening, something unusual was about to happen. Not a loud, crashing sort of unusual, but a quiet, magical one. The kind you almost miss unless you're looking very carefully. Eliot Merriweather was 11 years old, and he always looked carefully. He was the sort of boy who noticed when the tulips in Mrs. Bindle's garden turned to follow the moonlight. He knew the exact hour the village cats gathered at the bakery back door for leftover cream. Eliot noticed things, and sometimes those things noticed him back. That evening, as the sun slipped away and the sky grew dusky and blue, Eliot heard a soft thump at the front door. Not a knock, not a delivery, just a presence. He opened the door slowly, half expecting it to be the wind again. But on the doorstep sat a small bundle, neatly wrapped in velvet the color of midnight. There was no tag, no note, only a smooth, round wax seal imprinted with a feather. His heart beat a little faster. Carefully, he peeled the cloth open. Inside was an old map, aged parchment with edges curled like cinnamon bark. It shimmered faintly as though moonlight was sewn into its fibers. A tiny compass spun once and clicked into place in the upper corner. And in the center, written in golden ink that gleamed softly in the dim light, were the words, "To the one who listens when the world sleeps." Eliot stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether to feel delighted or uneasy. He looked up and down the street. It was empty. Lamplight flickered. Nothing stirred. Even the crickets had gone still. He brought the map inside and laid it flat on his desk. It showed places he'd never heard of. Echo Valley, the Forest of Forgotten Songs, the Mirror Lake, and something called the Skyless Hollow. There were no roads, only winding paths drawn in delicate silver ink, like threads of spider silk. And at the very bottom corner, he spotted a tiny drawing of an owl. A sudden rustling noise made him whirl around, but it was only the curtains dancing in a breeze. Yet the windows were closed. He stepped forward to fix them, but the wind brushed past him again, cool and whispering. That's when he heard it, a soft, unmistakable hoot. He turned, and there, perched atop his bookshelf, was the most beautiful owl he had ever seen. Its feathers were snow white, dusted with silver at the tips like frost. Its eyes were golden and impossibly calm, as though they held the memory of 1,000 winters. "You're Eliot," the owl said, in a voice that was not quite a voice, but more like a thought pressed gently into his mind. Eliot blinked. "You speak?" "I am Ovara," she replied, bowing her head with quiet dignity. "Guardian of the Valley of Echoes. The map has chosen you, and I have come to guide you." Eliot felt like his knees might forget how to stand. "Guide me where?" "To recover the 5 stars of the forgotten sky. Only once they're restored can the valley sing again. Without them, silence will swallow the magic that once whispered through this world." He didn't understand everything she said, but he felt the truth in it. The map hadn't come to him by accident, and somehow, this wasn't the first time he'd waited for something like this, only the first time it had finally arrived. "But how do I begin?" he asked. Ovara's feathers ruffled gently. "When the world sleeps, the path will open. You must trust your senses, but more than that, your silence." She turned to the window. "Come." Eliot hesitated only for a moment. He stuffed the map into his satchel, grabbed his flashlight, and followed Ovara to the window. The glass had vanished. Beyond the frame was no longer his yard, but a starlit path winding across an endless sky. One step, and the night would begin. The river that remembers. The stars above Eliot twinkled like they were alive, and maybe they were. As he stepped onto the silver path outside his window, he felt something shift, not in his body, but in the air around him. It was like stepping into a dream you were still wide awake for. Ovara soared ahead, her wings leaving soft ripples in the air, as though she flew through water instead of sky. Eliot followed without question. The path wound gently down until it reached a river unlike anything he'd seen before. The water shimmered, not with the reflection of the sky, but with scenes. Floating across the surface like glass were moments. A birthday candle flickering, a small girl laughing with a missing tooth, someone wrapping a gift in a hurry. It was like the river held not just water, but memories. This, Ovara said, landing gracefully beside him, is the river that remembers. To cross it, you must offer it a memory, one real and true. Only then will the bridge reveal itself. Eliot crouched by the edge and looked into the current. His reflection wasn't there. Instead, he saw images of himself, chasing bubbles in the spring rain, hugging his sister after she fell off her bike, staying silent when he could have told on someone at school. Good things, hard things. He bit his lip. What if I can't choose, he whispered. You will, said Ovara gently, because the memory you need will choose you. As he gazed deeper, one image slowly grew clearer than the rest. It was a moment he had nearly forgotten, or maybe hidden. A winter's day. His sister Nora was sick in bed. Their mother was rushing about with soup and tea. Eliot had been saving his favorite treat, a warm blueberry tart from Miss Bell's bakery. He had waited all week for it, but when he saw Nora curled up, pale and tired, he placed the tart on her nightstand without saying a word. He remembered the way her eyes lit up when she found it, the way her smile returned, just a little. He had never told her it was from him. He closed his eyes, held the memory in his heart like a small candle, and whispered, I give this to the river. There was a pause. Then the water beneath him glowed softly, golden threads swirling outward like ripples made of light. From the center of the river, a narrow bridge rose, shimmering and translucent, made from strands of memory itself. Eliot stood, heart thudding, and stepped onto the bridge. Each step made the bridge shimmer brighter, as if it could feel the kindness in him. He didn't rush. He walked gently, reverently. Halfway across, he turned to look behind, and the bridge had already faded back into water. It only appears once, Ovara said as she glided beside him, but it's never truly gone. That memory lives in you, always. Eliot smiled a little. He felt taller. On the far bank, the landscape changed. The sky above was still dotted with stars, but trees had begun to appear, tall and quiet, their trunks wide and dark like ancient sentinels. Ahead, music shimmered in the air, faint and distant, like the final note of a forgotten song still echoing through the trees. The next star lies ahead, Ovara said, but you'll need to remember what the world forgot. And with that, they stepped into the forest of forgotten songs. The forest of forgotten songs. The trees stood still, taller than church steeples, their trunks wide and gnarled like folded hands in prayer. As Eliot stepped into the forest, a hush fell so deep that even his footsteps seemed to tiptoe. The only sound was the faint brushing of wind high in the branches, too far up to see. Ovara fluttered to a lower branch and tucked in her wings. This is the forest of forgotten songs, she said. Long ago, lullabies and melodies used to live in these trees. But as the world rushed louder and fewer children listened at bedtime, the songs began to sleep. And now, they hardly remember themselves. Eliot turned in a slow circle. All around him, thick trunks rose in every direction. No birds, no rustling leaves, no hums. Just silence. The kind of silence that made your ears ring and your thoughts feel too loud. But how do we find a song that's been forgotten? He asked. You don't find it, said Ovara softly. You remember it. She pointed with her wing to a hollow in a nearby tree, a small opening just large enough for Eliot's hand. Inside, he could just barely make out a glowing shard, faint, like moonlight through a curtain. That, she said, is the first star, but it is asleep. It will only awaken to the song that once gave it life, and only you can bring it back. Eliot stepped closer. As he did, a breeze picked up, swirling gently around his ears. And then, something strange. A note. Just one. Faint, lonely, like a single piano key pressed in the dark. He froze. Did you hear that? It's begun, Ovara said. The forest is listening. Eliot closed his eyes. He thought of songs, not pop songs or jingles or anything from the radio. No, This place was older than that. He tried to hum something his mother used to sing, but the melody crumbled halfway through. Too recent. He tried whistling the theme from his favorite story show, but the trees remained quiet. Then, something else stirred. A hum, not his own, but from memory. Soft, warm, and slow. His grandmother. He saw her hands knitting, a candle flickering on the table, and her voice humming as he fell asleep on the couch beside her. A lullaby with no name, a melody without words. He began to hum it, at first only his own voice, then a second note, then another, and then the wind joined in, not howling, but harmonizing. The leaves began to rustle gently, branches swaying. Bark vibrated like harp strings. The forest, it was singing. The song wrapped around him like a blanket. He kept humming, even as his voice cracked a little. The melody wove itself through the trees, lifting higher with each breath, until the entire grove felt like it was humming with light. And then, a glow. The hollow in the tree burst softly with white gold brilliance. Eliot opened his eyes. The shard inside the tree pulsed like a heartbeat. "Go," whispered Ovara. He reached in, hand trembling slightly, and closed his fingers around the star. It felt light, not like it weighed nothing, but like it was made of kindness. It pulsed once in his palm, then quieted, becoming a small orb no larger than a chestnut. It floated gently above his hand, then sank into a pocket of the map that hadn't existed before. One labeled simply, First Star. Ovara tilted her head. 1 of 5. The forest, now fully awake, sparkled in faint, hidden notes. From every tree he could hear fragments of melodies, tunes waiting for someone to find them again. "Do the songs stay awake now?" Eliot asked, looking around. "For a time," she said. "You reminded them. That matters more than you know." As they left the forest, Eliot glanced back. The trees no longer seemed solemn. They stood like old musicians after a long performance, silent now but smiling. Ahead, the path darkened once again. A chill prickled Eliot's arms. "What's next?" he asked. Ovara's golden eyes narrowed gently. "A place where sound has no place, where even your thoughts may echo back unkind." She flew ahead, wings slicing through a growing mist. Eliot followed. They were heading toward the skyless hollow, the Mirror Lake. They walked in silence for what felt like an hour, maybe more. The forest had faded behind them, the songs now only a memory Eliot carried in his chest. The starlit path twisted down into a quiet valley where fog clung to the ground like sleeping clouds. And there, nestled in the stillness, lay a wide lake. It was smooth as glass. Not a single ripple disturbed its surface. No reeds, no fish, no wind. Just a perfect circle of water, and the stars above reflected in it, except they weren't twinkling. They were watching. Eliot stepped closer and looked down. But what he saw wasn't his reflection. At first it looked like him. Same eyes, same tousled hair. But then the reflection blinked, and Eliot realized it was showing him not what he looked like, but who he was. The reflection frowned when he hesitated. It smiled when he remembered his sister. Its eyes dimmed when he thought about the time he lied to avoid trouble, and they sparkled when he remembered being brave. "It's like it knows me," Eliot whispered. "It does," Ovara said, landing beside him. "This is Mirror Lake, a place where truth is water and honesty floats to the surface." Eliot studied the lake again. His reflection now stood upright, no longer copying him, but acting independently. It motioned to the far side of the lake, where a stone pedestal stood with something glowing faintly on top. The second star. "Is that it?" Eliot asked. "Yes," said Ovara. "But you cannot walk across this water. The lake allows passage only when you face what lies deepest in your own reflection." Eliot stared at the calm surface. "What if I don't like what I see?" "Then you're ready," she replied. He knelt at the edge. His reflection knelt too, this time perfectly in sync again. Eliot closed his eyes. He remembered the time he had told his friend Will that he couldn't come over, even though he had nothing else to do. Just because he felt like being alone, and didn't want to explain. Will had looked disappointed but said nothing. Eliot had never apologized. He just let it drift away like a cloud he didn't want to chase. The memory stung a little, but as he let himself feel it, something shifted in the water. A single ripple spread from beneath his knees, circling outward like a bell's quiet echo. He opened his eyes, the reflection looked at him, and smiled. From the far side of the lake, a slender bridge of shimmering light began to form. This one wide enough for 2 feet, but narrow as a dream. Eliot rose slowly and stepped onto it. The bridge held, strong and sure. Step by step, he crossed, not rushing, not running. He walked like someone who had chosen to be seen, even by himself. When he reached the pedestal, the star before him flared softly, a warm amber glow like the final light in a candle. He reached out. This star felt different from the first. Not just kind, but honest, like it weighed nothing and everything all at once. As it floated into the map's second pocket, Eliot let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You faced yourself," said Ovara, who had silently flown across behind him. "Few do." "Do I have to like everything I see?" Eliot asked quietly. "No," she said, her voice like wind through feathers. "Only accept it. That is enough." Eliot looked back at the lake. His reflection was gone. Just the stars now, watching calmly as if satisfied. The path ahead curved again, now rising, leading into a craggy line of dark hills. A soundless wind tugged at Eliot's sleeves. The air grew heavier. Even Ovara's wings seemed slower now. "What's next?" Eliot asked, already sensing the answer. "The skyless hollow," she said, "where nothing echoes, and silence can test the strongest voice." Eliot nodded. He wasn't sure he was ready, but he was willing. The skyless hollow. The hills before them rose like ancient backs of sleeping giants. Sharp rocks jutted out like ribs beneath skin, and the path narrowed into a thin ribbon of stone. Above, the stars began to vanish, one by one, until even the moon had disappeared behind thick clouds. It was darker here, colder too. "This place feels wrong," Eliot whispered. Ovara flew just ahead, but even she moved more slowly now. "This is the skyless hollow," she said, "a place where sound disappears, where even your heartbeat forgets to echo." They reached the edge of a vast cavern, wide, black, and waiting. Eliot stepped closer, and the air shifted. The breeze that had followed them all this time simply stopped. There was no rustling, no insects, not even the sound of Eliot's own breathing. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His voice had vanished. Panic bubbled in his chest. He clutched his throat, but he wasn't choking, just silenced. Ovara turned and looked at him calmly, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "The hollow takes sound from those who fear their silence." Her voice echoed in his mind, clear though her beak never moved. "If you want to pass, you must walk in quiet and not run from it." Eliot swallowed hard. Even the sound of that and the soft gulp of his throat made no sound at all. He stepped into the cave. The stone beneath his feet felt smooth, as if thousands had walked it before him. But every footstep was silent. His thoughts became louder. What if I get lost? What if I can't find the way out? What if this place keeps my voice forever? The deeper he walked, the closer the walls drew. The ceiling lowered. It felt like being swallowed. And then, a flicker, faint, blue, ahead. He followed it, carefully. The deeper he went, the more he began to hear. Not with his ears, but with his chest. Not sounds exactly, but feelings. A memory of being alone at school when no one noticed him at lunch. A time he had hidden under his bed, not because he was scared of monsters, but because his parents had argued and he didn't know what to do. Moments of quiet he had once hated, but now realized were part of him. The blue glow grew brighter. It hovered just ahead, deep inside a round chamber where the ceiling arched high, carved by time. In the center, on a pedestal of dark stone, floated the third star, the one that did not sing or shine or echo. It simply was. He stepped closer, and for the first time he didn't feel the need to speak. He didn't need to be brave or clever or fast. He only needed to be still. He knelt before the star, closed his eyes and listened, not for music, not for words, but for his own quiet. And in that silence, he heard something deeper than sound. He heard peace. The star lowered gently into his waiting hands. This one felt heavy, but not like a burden, more like a blanket, like being held. As it vanished into the third pocket of the map, a single soft sound rang through the hollow. The first sound in what felt like forever, a heartbeat, his own. Ovara landed beside him. She too had said nothing since they entered. Now she looked at him with something new in her eyes. Respect. Silence can be frightening, she said aloud now, her voice returning to the air like birdsong at dawn. But you faced it, and in doing so, gave it voice. Eliot looked back down the tunnel. Still no stars, still no moonlight. But inside him, something had lit up. They exited the hollow in silence, but not the kind that weighs you down. This silence was restful, whole. And as they stepped once more onto the starlit path, Eliot looked up. The moon had returned. The stars blinked gently as if nodding. "How many stars are left?" he asked. "Two," said Ovara, "and the next awaits in a place made not of stone or sky, but of dreams." Eliot blinked. "Dreams?" She smiled with her eyes. "Exactly." And the path ahead began to bloom with petals of glowing light. The garden that grew from dreams. The starlit path changed. It softened somehow, from cool stone to warm moss, then to a kind of glowing earth that pulsed gently beneath Eliot's feet, like a heartbeat in the soil. All around him, strange flowers swayed even though there was no breeze. Their petals shimmered with colors that had no name. Ahead, the world opened up. They had entered a garden, but not a garden of this world. This one felt like it had grown from someone's imagination, or maybe from everyone's. Trees with lantern fruit dangled glowing bulbs. Vines curled into spiral staircases. Mushrooms rang like chimes when you stepped too close. Eliot stared in wonder. "Where are we?" "This," said Ovara, "is the garden that grew from dreams." She landed gently on the branch of a glowing willow tree. Everything here was once imagined by someone. A child's bedtime story, a half-finished drawing, a wish whispered into a pillow. When dreams are strong and full of wonder, they come here, to root, to grow, and sometimes to bloom. Eliot turned in a slow circle. Every flower, every tree, every vine, each one pulsed with a quiet kind of joy. But something was missing. "There are no people here," he said. "There once were," Ovara replied. "Wanderers, sleepers, artists, anyone who dared to believe in what they couldn't see. But over time, the dreaming faded. Grown-ups forgot how. Children were hurried out of wonder." She looked around. The garden began to wither. Eliot stepped forward. The ground here was dry. The glowing plants faded to gray. The trees stood still, brittle and leafless. And in the very center of the garden stood a single patch of soil, bare, cracked, and silent. At its heart, a small pot rested on a marble pedestal. Inside it, only dust. "What is this?" he asked softly. "The fourth star sleeps here," said Ovara. "But it cannot be taken. It must be grown. Only a true dream, one you believe in, even when you're awake, can awaken it." Eliot frowned. I don't know if I have a dream like that." "You do," she said. "You just haven't looked at it in a while." He stared down at the empty pot. A dream. What did he want, really want, so deeply that it reached past sleep, into his bones? He sat down on the ground beside the pedestal. At first, all he could think of were little things. Wanting a dog, a treehouse, a full day with no chores. But the garden didn't stir. The pot remained dry. Then deeper thoughts. He thought of his sister, her laughter, his parents when they weren't busy. He thought of books he'd read, stories he'd imagined finishing, maps he'd once drawn on napkins in restaurants. And then it came. "I want the world to stay magical," he whispered aloud. voice shaky. Even when I'm older, I want to believe in wonder. I want to remember what it feels like to not understand everything and to love that feeling, not fear it. The garden held its breath. Eliot closed his eyes, cupped his hands around the invisible shape of that wish, and planted it, gently, carefully, in the soil. Nothing happened. Then, a glow. From the pot, a soft, golden sprout pushed through the dust. It unfurled like a melody, growing tall, leafless, gleaming. And at the very top of the dream sprout, the fourth star bloomed, bright as dawn, light as dandelion fluff. It hovered in place, then floated toward Eliot, like it had known him all along. As it tucked itself into the fourth pocket of the map, the garden sighed. Color returned to the petals, vines began to spiral again. Light poured from the roots and into the leaves, as if the dream Eliot had planted had reminded the others what they once were. Ovara fluttered down beside him. "Well done," she said, her voice almost a purr. "You dreamed with your eyes open." Eliot looked back at the sprout. "Will it keep growing?" "Yes," said Ovara, "because now you carry it with you." And as they turned to leave, Eliot saw other children in the garden. Not real ones, but echoes. Smiling, drawing, reading, planting. Dreams waiting to be dreamed again. They returned to the path. One pocket left. One star to go. Ovara's wings rustled. "Now we return." The Valley of Echoes waits. The valley sings again. The sky had begun to turn the soft color of candlelight. Though night still blanketed the land, Eliot could feel a change in the air, like the moment just before dawn, when the world pauses, waiting to breathe again. He and Ovara walked in silence. The map in his pocket glowed gently with the weight of 4 stars. Each one pulsed with a different kind of light. Kindness, honesty, silence, and imagination. Only one space remained, the final pocket. As they walked, Eliot noticed something strange. The stars above were no longer steady. They trembled, flickering like tired fireflies. The wind was still. No birds sang. Even the light from the moon had grown pale. At the end of the path lay a wide, open valley. Echo Valley, but it did not sing. Where Eliot had expected mountains, rivers, and music in the air, he found stillness. Great gray stones sat in perfect silence. Trees stood without rustle. The air tasted old, like paper left in a drawer too long. "This is it," Ovara said, landing beside him. "This is the heart of the world's wonder. Once echoes of every beautiful sound lived here. Laughter, lullabies, the first words spoken in love." She looked around, feathers gently ruffling. But when the stars were lost, the echoes faded, and with them, magic began to disappear. Eliot looked at the 4 stars inside his map. "We've found almost all of them. Where's the last?" Ovara nodded toward a single stone tower in the center of the valley. Crumbling, ancient, hollow. "That tower once rang with the voices of 1,000 dreams," she said. "Now it is empty. Inside, the final star lies hidden in silence, but you can't find it with your hands or even your eyes." Eliot felt a familiar weight in his chest. "I have to listen again, don't I?" "Not just listen," said Ovara. "You must remember what listens to you." The tower door creaked as he stepped inside. It was darker than a cave, dust dancing in the thin shaft of moonlight through the roof. The stone walls were covered in faint carvings. Not letters, but shapes. Hearts, stars, waves, eyes. At the very center of the floor was a round, empty basin. Eliot approached it and listened. Nothing, just his own breath. He knelt beside the basin. "I don't understand," he whispered. "I've remembered kindness, faced my reflection, accepted silence, dreamed awake. What else is there?" The map pulsed once in his pocket. He reached in and touched the 4 stars. And then something happened. He heard them. Not with his ears, but in his mind, like the memory of a song you once loved. He heard his sister laughing, the sound of rain on his window, his grandmother humming, Ovara's voice, the trees singing, his own heartbeat in the hollow, the silence that wasn't empty, but full of space. And through it all, he heard a voice, his own, speaking softly. I want the world to stay magical. He leaned over the basin and whispered, "Can you hear me?" A pause, and then, from the stone itself, a soft, round tone. Not a word, not a melody, but the beginning of sound. The basin filled with light. A soft golden pulse rose from the center, blooming outward, forming the fifth and final star, bright white, laced with every color Eliot had ever seen. It floated up and settled into the final pocket of the map. Outside, the ground trembled gently. Eliot ran out of the tower. In the valley, echoes returned. A gust of wind carried laughter, not from anyone near, but from everyone who had ever laughed. The trees began to sway and whisper. The sky rippled, as if awakening from sleep, and the stars burned brighter than ever. And far above, a song began, a deep, slow melody sung by something older than time. The valley sang again. Eliot turned to Ovara. "It's back," he said, almost in awe. She nodded. "Because you brought it back. You listened. And more than that, you let yourself be heard." The map pulsed once more, its glow fading gently. Eliot looked at the stars inside. They were quiet now, complete. "Will I remember all this when I wake up?" he asked. Ovara blinked slowly. "If you choose to." She flapped her wings once, then hovered. "It's time to go. But you've changed, Eliot, and because of that, the world will change too, in ways you may never see, but will always feel." The sky above shimmered. The stars twisted into a spiral, and the path began to pull Eliot upward. Soft at first, then faster. Ovara flew beside him one last time. "Until the world needs you again," she said. "Keep dreaming. Keep listening." The wind took him. The stars spun. The valley faded. Eliot awoke to sunlight on his face. His room looked the same. Books on the shelf, curtains fluttering in a lazy breeze. But something felt different. On his desk, where he always kept his sketchbook, sat the midnight blue cloth, folded neatly. Beside it, a single feather, silver-tipped. And in his heart, a melody, one he would never forget.